Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Friday morning, right? So, always a good day to wake up, and it's the last day of the week, ready for a weekend. But, anyways, look, I was just reading through Hebrews 3, and I was at verses 4 through 6, and just a couple things were hopping out, and I was looking at some old notes that I had made, and was just kind of processing through and sort of reprocessing again, if you will allow me that. And it's just reading this, and it something interesting struck me this morning here. So Hebrews 3:4 through 6 is talking about the language here is about Moses, and the comparison of Moses to Jesus, right? And so in 4 through 6 it says, "For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God." Now the house that we're talking about there it's there's a lot of directions you can go with that word house, but I think mostly it's talking about the church, the church organization, right? The every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. So the builder of the church is God, builder of the organization and the organism, right? The organization meaning the church building with the structure and all the bylaws and all the physical stuff, but then the organism, which is the people, God builds that too. And it says that Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant, right? In the family of God as a servant, for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. But Christ was faithful as son over his house, whose house we are, if we hold fast our confidence in the boast of our hope firm until the end. That last little piece, verse 6, I got another video to make about that, but I wanted to speak a little bit about Moses and Jesus. Moses was called the servant in the house, and Jesus was referred to as being over the house. And I just wanted to, I remember reading and documenting this or writing commentary on this the first time, and I remember I remember thinking that was a pretty bold statement about hierarchy in the church today, a bold statement about the organizational chart in a church, if you will, today. So we live in an age when clergy, while I agree that we do have a special gifting, I'm clergy, right? So, I mean, I work full time as a seventh grade teacher at a middle school. I teach seventh grade math. So the church thing, I'm not supported by that. My associate pastor, Pastor Dean, he has a full-time job, so he's not supported by the church either. But we're still clergy, right? And I would agree that we have a special gifting to teach and preach, and sometimes pastors can get put up on a pedestal in a church, and I hope that's not what's happened here at White Oak. But there is a thing that I used to, when I was in the Southern Baptist Church, I used to call this thing the Southern Baptist papacy, but I just kind of call this there's a thing I call the church papacy, right? It's not a Catholic thing, but I have a real problem I have a real problem with when I say your church lives in a papacy, that you set the pastor up in such a position that he's almost worshipped over anything and everything else in that church. In a lot of churches, whether those churches would admit it or not, the pastor is given a lot of leeway and a lot of freedom. This leeway and freedom sometimes balloons into privilege. This privilege could sometimes become entitlement. I've seen pastors live very entitled lives. I'm not trying to dog pastors. I'm a pastor, but entitlement is it can be a problem. So. I'm just pointing some things out here. There's a misconception today about the clergy, and I think it goes back, or it's at least illustrated in the tradition of the Roman Catholic Church, the doctrine of papal infallibility, right? And this is not dogging Catholics either, not dogging pastors, not dogging Catholics. Just trying to make a point. So the Catholic doctrine of papal infallibility, words are hard. The Catholic doctrine of papal infallibility, which was declared, it was back in the First Vatican Council on July 18th, 1870, basically states that when the Pope is exercising his office as a shepherd and teacher of all Christians, the doctrines on faith and morals, that he declares are without error. So the Pope can speak and be perfectly 100% pure and perfect in his declarations. In other words, if the Pope says that he's making a statement for all Christians from his position as Pope, which is what they call ex cathedra, then he's always right. So hold that thought for just a second here, okay? When you look at the analogy of the house in Hebrews 3:4-6, there is nowhere in the house where the prophet is given a different degree of preference from the rest of the servants in the house. A pastor or a preacher is supposed to be a servant in the house, like everybody else is a servant in the house. I agree that Moses was special in that God chose him to do a certain great work, right? No doubt about that. But he's called to be a servant. I sweep floors with everybody else. I do dishes with everybody else, right? I've always heard, I grew up in Texas, and we always heard this saying that if you think you're a man of some influence, try ordering somebody else's dog around a while and see how that goes for you. So anyways, verses 4-6 uses a sort of construction language, right? To make the point that the Lord is a builder. The church is considered to be the house that is being built. God's the builder. We have to remember that God is the builder, okay? Moses was referred to as a servant. Well, Christ was the one over. Jesus is the one over all the servants in the house, and that includes pastors and everybody else who comes to church. So, it could easily be drawn from this passage that all Christians are servants in the house, which means that the house is quite literally built out of servants, not for servants, but of servants. This means that the entire church, right, clergy included, like it or not, has service to God and others as an underlying principle. So taking a step back, and I don't want to come off as critical, and I know I'm criticizing a little bit here, but I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I want to paint a picture of what I think the relationship of the pastor of the church should be to people that we would call the laity. So clergy, laity, how does that work? So clergy is the churchy word for like the professionals that get paid by the church, and the laity are the people who come and volunteer to do all the ministry, right? Which should be everybody. So the non-professional, right? So the rest of the church. Organizational charts tell about an organization. About if you ever look at an organizational chart, it says who reports to who, right? And so somebody is always somebody else's boss on an organizational chart. So, and I think in organizational charts, I always think about who you report to and whatnot, and that's just military mindset. So at the top of our organizational chart in the church would be God, right? If you could imagine that. He is the builder, just like we stated, right? Next to God on that same line would be Jesus and the Holy Spirit, right? So if you draw a line down, right, you would have the church. If you draw the line down from Jesus, so God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, right down from Jesus, you got the church, right? So let's just say here that down from Jesus is the church. Well, pastor's going to be there somewhere. So on the same line as people in the same food chain level, right? People with the same authority. You come down, you get the church. So the church is under Jesus, right? So where would you draw a line to the pastor? That's my question. If I were to draw a line in the church to the pastor, would the line go sideways or would it go down? If you have, in other words, the pastor and all the people. Would all the people and the pastor be on the same line in an organizational chart, or would it be pastor and then everybody else underneath the pastor? That's the question. Now, you do need a church to have people who run it, right? I get that. I get you have to have people to run the business of the church and run certain errands and do certain things and do certain ministries. I get all that. But as far as who's in charge, that's the question. What is the pastor actually in charge of? So lots of churches would draw the line down and go to the rest of the congregation. But I don't think they do that necessarily on purpose. I think they do that with good intentions. But I think this gives a pastor authority that he doesn't necessarily have. I have heard pastors use language that says, I'm I'm the father of this church, and I'm the father, spiritual father, and this and that. And I get that, and I understand that, and that's true to a degree. But you're not the spiritual master. Maybe you're somebody's spiritual father. Maybe you're the spiritual father of a church, but you're not the master of that church. You don't own that church. You don't. You're not owed anything by that church, right? So, if Moses was a servant in the house, why would I not be a servant in the house with everybody else, right? If Moses himself, who was the greatest figure in Judaism, right, he's considered to be a servant, I'm supposed to be a servant as well. So as a pastor, I feel like I'm a facilitator. Is the pastor the only one who has vision for the church? If you asked a teenager in your congregation, right, what they would do differently in ministry, would you get an answer? You might actually get some different answers, right? Could you ask a police officer who attends your church what he thinks about the direction of ministry and get an answer? You probably would get an answer, right? Am I in charge of teenagers and police officers? This doesn't make any sense, right? So it takes away the doing life together and doing church together and puts this pastor up here telling everybody what to do. And a lot of times the pastor doesn't have any more of a clue how to do church and how to work in the community than anybody else. And a lot of times other people in the community have better ideas how to do that than the pastor. So anyhow, do you think that a person can be given a word from God who's not called pastor? Can the other servants get a word from God and give the word to the pastor rather than the pastor giving the word to the people? I mean, it goes that way sometimes. I've been there, right? So as a pastor, I preach and pray. I do facilitate the church quite a bit. I even have a certain vision for what the church can be. But I'm not the only one with vision for the church. I'm not the only one who has an idea of how our church can impact our community. So what if a pastor takes a step back and started looking at the position a little differently, right? What if we start looking at it as an equiper and a supporter rather than as this overlord, like a boss, right? What would it look like if I, as a pastor, now I'm going to point at myself here, right? So I don't want you to think I'm self-righteously pronouncing that everybody else is doing it wrong and I'm doing it right. But what if I did that? What if I looked at everybody else as co-equals, right? How much pressure from ministry would be lifted off of me as a pastor, as a leader? You know why people don't show up for business meetings? They feel like they don't have a voice. They feel like everything's like today, and we've got this election going on. Is your voice being heard, right? Start letting the congregation make some ministry decisions and see where the participation in your church goes. I bet it goes through the roof. I think pastors need to stay in their lanes, right? I've got a lane. Everybody else has got a lane. Pastor Dean has a lane. My wife has a lane. People do what they do, right, in church, and they serve in the church. I stay in my lane, right? So maybe making videos and kind of directing and giving people something to think about, I guess, is one of the things. But I'm not the only one who does this, right? I'm not the only one capable of doing this. Let me be clear. I think a church will be most effective when a pastor does stay in his lane or her lane and doesn't run everybody else sort of off the road, if you will. There are a lot of voices that represent a lot of hearts that bleed for a lot of people that attend churches in this country, okay? There's a lot of vision for helping people in this country, not just one dude in one church. I think it's time to start taking a chance that some of those voices might have better ideas on how to do ministry. How threatening is that to some pastors, right? In fact, some of those voices may have better ideas than the pastor. And that's a good thing, right? Why not harness it? The thing is that those voices don't have to be a threat. They don't, and that's the problem that we end up in there, right? Is this is my job. So when I'm threatened in my job, somebody's doing my job better than me as a pastor. And that's just a bunch of ridiculosity or whatever you want to call it there, right? There's a Davism for you. So it doesn't have to be a threat. If a person has an idea for ministry, it doesn't mean that they want to kick the pastor out of the church and take over. It just means that God uses people, right? Lots of people to build his kingdom. So when a pastor steps back and remembers that he's just another member of the congregation doing the best he can with the gifting and calling that he's been given, he's freed up to listen and hear what God might be doing in the life of the church. He's freed up to let other people lead. All right, there are a lot of leaders in our church, and you're very proud of our church. But if I'm freed up to let other people lead, they can cast a vision as well, and that's a good thing. The church, if it's freed from the bondage of the vision squelching one man show in what I might call the Southern Baptist papacy, then we're really poising ourselves for some greatness, right? So just remember to stay in your lane there, Pastor. I love you, and I hope you're doing well, and I'm going to remember to stay in my lane too, okay? So anyways, I hope you're having a good one. Stay safe out there. I love you, and I hope to see you sometime. Bye now.